Welcome to the Branded Market Podcast, the show for short-term rental owners who want to turn their listings into legacies. I'm your host, Allie Haney, owner and co-host of multiple properties and founder of Branded Market, where we help Airbnb hosts and short-term rental investors build intentional brands, smart marketing systems, and guest experiences that actually move the needle. Each week, I share practical strategies, real-life stories, and behind-the-scenes insights to help you attract the right guests, increase bookings, and run your rental like a business, so you too can be the best in your brand and your market. Let's dive in. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Branded Market Podcast. I'm your host, Allie Haney. I have to admit that it's been a while since I've sat down to record for the podcast. I do my best to try and batch the episodes, so sometimes it feels like it's been about 3 or 4 weeks in between the times that I get on the mic. But I will say that that gap in time allows me to really reflect on the content that I'm going to be talking about for the upcoming month. And so these last 3 to 4 weeks where I haven't been recording, I have had about, I want to say close to 10 or 12 consultation calls with various people in the real estate industry. The vast majority are short-term rental owners. Some are boutique hotel and micro resort owners. Some are property managers. Hotel management, like it runs the gamut. But what I've done is throughout these consultation calls, I have tried to bring in the recurring questions and take note of those so that I can then put them on the podcast and be able to help everyone and not just one-off consultation calls. So that is what led me to the topic that I'm going to be chatting about today. And that topic is when exactly to hire a brand designer when you are looking to start a short-term rental. That timeline can look a little bit fuzzy, and I think oftentimes people jump straight into interior design, perhaps because that seems like it is the most fun, or maybe it seems like it's the item on your checklist that has the most tangible result because when you're done, you have furniture in the house. I would like to challenge that and say, what if you have the timeline backwards? What if, in fact, a brand designer is the one that should come first? And that's what I'm going to talk about today, is why you should hire your brand strategist and designer prior to hiring your interior designer if you are looking to start a short-term rental, a boutique hotel, a micro resort, what have you. So let's dive in. First, I want to talk about what branding actually is. If you've been on this podcast or listening to this podcast for a while, then you already know what branding is, but if you're new around here, I want to tell you exactly what branding is and how it can support you as a short-term rental owner. So when people think of branding, they often think of the technical things, the visual things. So immediately they jump to that logo. They jump to the color palette. They jump to the font or the typography of what's going to be on their website. And don't get me wrong, all of that absolutely falls under the umbrella of branding. However, in order to get to all of those pretty things, we have to do the dirty work first. And the dirty work is the brand strategy behind the actual visual brand that represents itself on a logo. What brand strategy is figuring out who your ideal guest is going to be, getting down into the nitty-gritty, giving the ideal guest a name, an occupation, a family status, what their hobbies are, what motivates them. We're going to get basically into the psyche of the exact person that you would like to walk through the front doors of your short-term rental. We're going to talk about what makes you different within your market. We're going to talk about the messaging that you're going to put behind any type of marketing collateral that you put out into the world. That could be on your website, your direct booking site. That could be on your social media. That could be in your welcome messages to your guests. That could be in your email marketing to follow up and nurture your guests. All of that falls under brand strategy. And so that brand strategy is going to be the foundation of any type of visual that we create, and we have to have it before we start creating. Much like if you are building a new construction short-term rental, you're not going to start framing in walls before you have a foundation. We're not going to start your brand design until we have your brand strategy, which is the foundation of your brand. Let me give you a little bit of a way to reframe when you're kind of thinking in terms of who am I going to hire first throughout this process, the interior designer or the brand designer. Brand strategy is going to define the experience. Interior design is going to execute the experience. They absolutely go hand in hand, but I'll tell you why brand strategy needs to come before interior design. There are a few reasons. First is the market research that goes into brand design. I know that there are some interior designers out there. In fact, I have worked with an interior designer specifically for our newest short-term rental that does some of this market research. And so I don't want to say that no interior designers do this. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that brand designers do it through a little bit of a different lens. So what I'm going to do first as your brand strategist and designer is I'm going to look at the market research and see what that tells me. I'm going to study the local market to see what the existing listings look like, to see what their reviews say, to see what's been going well for them, what's not been going well for them. I'm going to see if there already is some step up in interior design, any like color palettes that maybe have been saturated in that market so we can stand out by using some sort of different color palette. I'm going to see if there's an ideal guest that I feel like is overserved in that market so we can serve the underserved ideal guest. Let me take Nashville, Tennessee as an example. So Nashville, Tennessee is a very, very, very saturated bachelorette market. If we wanted to serve, let's say we want to serve the bachelorette market, we've already decided that. That's just something that you're really passionate about. I'm going to do research to figure out what type of themes, what type of brand messaging, what type of color palettes are already there existing in that market so that we can differentiate ourselves from that. But if we want to differentiate ourselves based on the ideal guest, I can see that there are a ton of bachelorette places already there. That's an overserved market there. And maybe we want to target a couples, instead of big bachelorette houses. I'm going to touch on this a little bit later, but it just depends on the type of property too. For example, if it's a 1-bed, 1-bath condo, that ideal guest is going to be far different than like a 7-bedroom home, 7-bed, 7-bath home, right? So some of those things are going to be dictated by the actual setup of the property, but we can do all of that market research in advance. If you've already put in an offer on a house or a condo, we can do the market research for that specific bed and bath count so that we can see how we can differentiate ourselves in terms of brand strategy. Because yes, while some interior designers do this process and they do it very well, I'm looking beyond just the interior design onto the marketing strategy that's going to follow after. This, like I said, the strategy is going to impact how we market you on social media. The strategy is going to impact on how we speak to those guests throughout the pre-arrival, during their stay, and post-departure communication and messages. All of that is going to be affected by the brand strategy. And that's why you want to have a very clear brand strategy from the jump. So market research goes far beyond just interior design. And that's how I look at it through a lens of a brand strategist. Next, we're actually going to, like I said, put on the coat, wear the clothes of the ideal guest. We're going to figure out exactly what they're thinking, what motivates them, who they are. Are they coming with their family? Are they coming for a couples retreat? Are they coming, like I said, for the bachelorette party in Nashville? Are they people that are digital nomads and really they can work from anywhere and their stay is going to be a little bit longer? The needs of a digital nomad that's staying a little bit longer are going to be far different than the needs of a bachelorette party or a couples getaway. And all of those decisions of who that ideal guest is going to be is going to affect absolutely everything throughout your brand strategy. How do you talk to them in messages? How you market to them after they leave your property? All the things. We want to dive so deep into who they are, what they do for a living, where they're traveling from to get to your short-term rental, what their needs are going to be when they're there. We're going to anticipate those needs before they even arrive onto the property so that we can use our brand strategy to be able to answer those needs before they even know they have them. Next thing that I'm going to dive into as your brand strategist is your guest experience. I want to make sure that that guest experience is defined before it's designed. And I don't mean design as in brand design, but design as interior design. What does the arrival feel like? What's the emotion that we're trying to evoke as soon as they walk in the door? Are we going to be having like slow mornings and coffee? Are we going to be like blasting bachelorette music from the moment that we wake up and drinking mimosas? We want to define what that guest experience is going to be, how we're going to make them feel, so that then I can hand all of that brand strategy, or you can hand all of that brand strategy over to an interior designer to be able to execute that guest experience through the interior design, through the selecting of materials for your linens, for your towels. So we can make sure that the design flows for what the ideal guest actually needs while they're there. That's going to help us choose furniture. That's going to help us choose amenities and amenity strategy to know whether or not we need a hot tub to stand out, or we need a sauna and cold plunge to stand out, or we need a karaoke room to stand out. All of those things, you can see how they're interconnected, but the brand strategy behind all of that makes the decision-making process throughout the design process so much easier. Next up is that I want to touch on something that I feel like I've had a lot of conversations about lately. In fact, I went back through some of my old brand strategy clients, brand strategy and design clients, to see how many properties I've named. And I ended up naming about 65-ish% of the properties that come to me. They come to me with no name and not very much direction. And so I end up naming the property in addition to creating the brand strategy for it. And that is something that I feel like oftentimes either comes as an afterthought, or they come in with a name with not much strategy or thought but behind it, because it's something that might be sentimental or special to them, which I'm not saying is wrong. There's always a place for sentiment and special, a special place in your heart. But if we are really truly optimizing this to be a short-term rental that's going to be outperforming the rest, then we want to make sure that that name is going to speak to your ideal client. You're probably going to be so annoyed with hearing me say ideal client, ideal guest by the end of this episode. But we want to make sure that we keep that in mind when we are actually naming the property. There's been a very huge push, I touched on this in a previous episode, from Airbnb to direct booking sites lately. And so putting that name of your property right there in your listing on Airbnb to kind of give those savvy travelers, which more and more travelers are being savvier about where their money is spent, being able to give them kind of that little breadcrumb of what your property's name is, to see if they can then type it into ChatGPT or type it into Google and find your direct booking site. If it's something that's memorable to them, that's just going to increase your chances of being booked. So I don't want naming your property to be an afterthought, because that's exactly what's going to go into the brand design, the logo, all of the things that we can put inside the house to make it a cohesive brand experience. You guys have probably heard me say this before, but some good places to put your logo. First impression is everything. Putting it on a welcome mat outside of your front door is a really great place to prime your audience to be able to have a really awesome brand experience. And then a couple of other places that you could put your logo is on coffee mugs in your rental, or you could put them on little labels around water bottles that you leave for your guests. Little spaces where you can sprinkle in your brand logo, because the more they see it, the more familiar they're going to be with it, the more they're going to remember it, and the more they're going to refer it, as long as you deliver on that really great guest experience. Final thing that I will do as a brand strategist that will help inform your interior design is I'm going to give you a color palette that you can then pass on to your interior designer. This color palette, I feel like people just pick colors that they like oftentimes, and they don't really give much thought into the direction behind the color palette. But colors are extremely powerful when it comes to evoking emotion, when it comes to triggering a memory or a response or an emotional feeling that they've had. So we want to take that into account. What kind of guest experience are we trying to give to them? Who are we trying to target? And from there, we'll give us direction into establishing a color palette and color psychology that's going to be really powerful for your ideal guest. That's going to then be able to pass off to your interior designer. So your interior designer has very specific direction that they can go in. And from there, they can make that interior design experience so cohesive with the brand that it feels like you are stepping into a different world when you enter into your short-term rental or your vacation home. Pushing it a little further, again, like I said, past interior design. Interior design is going to define the guest experience, but we want to make sure that that interior design, that color palette is going to also translate to our online presence. So that is that actually going to be enough contrast in your color palette to be able to be executed on a direct booking site or to be able to be used on social media or email marketing? We as brand designers are thinking about a lot more when it comes to color palette than just what colors look pretty together. That's a really great indicator of a good color palette. The colors look good together, but we also want to make sure that they're actually readable, legible, and have enough contrast to be able to be used across all of your marketing materials to be super duper cohesive. Now I've told you all the things that I'm going to be doing as your brand strategist behind the scenes before you even get to your interior designer, but I also want to take a little bit of a step back so that we can look at the timeline. Because if you're in the moment of like having to close and do due diligence and all the things, I hire a brand designer and strategist, hire an interior designer. There are a lot of moving parts, especially if you're maybe doing a renovation and you're lining up contractors for construction as well. I get it because we just went through it. So I want to do my best to give you a timeline blueprint, so to speak, to figure out when exactly to hire your brand strategist and designer, since I say, let's hire that person before we hire your interior designer. The average brand strategy and design timeline for my clients is approximately 4 weeks from the time that we do our brand strategy call, which is like, it's a little bit past onboarding. You'll do an onboarding questionnaire. Within a week of that onboarding questionnaire, you'll do brand strategy call with me, which is about an hour long. And I ask you what seems like a bunch of random questions, but really I am just distilling it down to all of the information that I need that's inside of your brain that you don't realize is there so that I can pull out a brand strategy to present to you. I'm going to give you that brand strategy to look over, make sure that I'm on the right track in terms of, yes, this is the ideal guest that we are attracting. This is what differentiates us within our market. These are our brand messaging, words, phrases, stories, themes, all the things. I want to make sure that we are on the right track. From there, once you approve that brand strategy, I'm going to jump into the color palette and mood board design. I'm going to send you 2 different color palettes so that you can choose the direction in which we want to go. And then once you decide on that color palette, we start the actual design process because we have our foundation. I know which direction we're going in, and now we're off to the races. I can create that brand design, which is the logos, primary and secondary logo, your submark, your icon, your typography, all of the different fonts that we're going to include. And then after you get that back, you can approve it, and we are complete with our brand strategy and design process. But those basically like 4 different checkpoints: the brand strategy call, me returning the brand strategy document to you, the color palette and mood board design, and then finally the logo design. All of that, all in all, takes about 4 weeks. Now, when I'm trying to figure out when to hire the brand strategist and designer and when to hire the interior designer, once I have that brand strategy and that color palette finalized, that is what you can hand to your your interior designer so that they can get started on the interior design. Now, I can't speak directly to what an interior designer's timeline looks like, but I can give you the experience that I have. And my experience with Brianna Michelle Interiors was super duper quick. She had my designs back to me, I think within like 2.5 weeks, which is extremely efficient. I think sometimes it can take closer to like 4 to 6 weeks for interior design. So I will give you my timeline. We hang out right around the 4-week mark, but about 2 weeks in, you'll have the deliverables that you need to be able to give to the interior designer so that they can execute the interior design portion of it while I'm finishing up the logo design. Now, when do I come into the picture? I would suggest that if you're in the closing process, that you hire a brand strategist or designer after you get through the due diligence phase. I don't see much of a point financially to book me and my services or any brand strategist and designer services prior to getting to the due diligence phase, because what if something crazy comes up on a report and you have to back out of the contract? Unfortunately, you've likely at that point already paid my deposit, which is not refundable. And so it's not really a financially wise decision to book me until you know that you're going to go through with that sale. If it's a 30-day close, 2 weeks before closing, we would kick off strategy right after the due diligence period. At the time of closing, about 2 weeks later, you would have that brand strategy and the color palettes be able to hand off to the interior designer. So like I said, while I'm finishing up, the interior designer can get started and condense that timeline from closing until when you're ready to launch and you can start making money with your short-term rental. I now want to tell you what happens if you don't do some sort of research around the ideal guest that you want to bring in, putting some sort of thought into your brand strategy process, because unfortunately, short-term rental world has changed so much in the last 6 years, maybe when we first started to get in the game, that the strategies have changed. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story, and then I will tell you what my recommendation is, or what my warning is, rather, if you don't decide to look a little bit deeper into your brand strategy and your ideal guests. So back in 2019, that's when we started our short-term rental journey by accident, actually. When we did that, we got our long-term renters out in mid-October of 2019. We hosted our first guests for Thanksgiving 2019. So looking back on it, that was a very fast timeline for us to have lived 5 hours away. We got it cleaned out, renovated, all new flooring down upstairs, all new paint in the whole house, and furnished that whole place in 6 weeks. We furnished the place off of Facebook Marketplace, the vast majority, and some hand-me-downs from our parents. That property had such a high occupancy. We were running like 85%, especially in the summers. We were just slam packed, same day turnovers, like 4 or 5 in a month. And I love the house because it was my first house that Caleb and I ever bought together. Would I say that it was like a knockout seal of a house? Probably not. I mean, it had a fenced-in backyard. It was 3 beds, 2.5 bath with a bonus room. We converted that bonus room into the kids' room with 2 sets of bunk beds in there. So it was a lot of fun. And it was about half mile from the water. But that water wasn't like the beach. It was 5 minutes from the beach. So like, it was a good house. Would I have said like, this is hands down going to be a knockout short-term rental? No, probably not, especially with my knowledge of the industry today. Right. So we didn't have much thought into our ideal guest. I had put a little bit of thought into it, but not nearly enough. But we ended up still hitting high occupancy rates. If we took that situation and applied it to today's, I'm going to say Airbnb market. I usually say short-term rental market, but specifically with Airbnbs, I feel like it's just not cutting it anymore. There's going to have to be more intention behind the guest experience. There's going to have to be more intention behind interior design. And the way to bring both of those together is through brand strategy. So if we don't do that, if we don't include that brand strategy portion of it, where we're really setting up our property to speak to a specific person, unfortunately, I think your rental is going to fall flat. You're probably going to underperform. You're probably not going to be happy with the performance of that property and therefore the overall revenue that you bring in through that property. Because I don't think that the market is saturated, but the competition is higher. Facebook Marketplace furniture doesn't cut it anymore. There has to be intention behind the design. So I just don't want it to be an afterthought of what you want your guest experience to be once you're 6 months in and you aren't making your mortgage payments. Instead, I would much rather for you to put the investment in upfront with a brand strategist, a brand designer, an interior designer, so that you can ensure that that investment is going to give you a return. So that was just my little anecdote and word of warning, or hopefully word of encouragement instead of warning, so that we can make sure we're hosting the guests that you want to host and giving them the experience that you want to give. It really, that's what it boils down to. So who should be listening to this episode right now? Maybe I should have put this at the beginning of the episode, but if you are in the closing phase, if you are in active search of a property, I want you to listen back to this and know exactly when to call me, exactly when to hire an interior designer, which I have recommendations if you would like those as well. If you are a short-term rental owner that perhaps is already past the process of searching for a house and you've already closed on it, but you're not performing as well as you want, then I encourage you to make the investment to have a little bit more direction so that you can then capitalize on the large investment that you've already made. So if you fall into any one of those categories, please call me. I have a couple of different offers for you today. First is the short-term rental acquisition checklist. I just went through this process with Luna that is on the future micro resort of Elysian back in November, so just 4 months ago. And while I was going through that process of acquiring Luna, I wrote down every single step of the way so that I could have basically a blueprint for myself the next time we go to acquire another short-term rental. And I made it into a really pretty PDF for you guys. So if you would like access to that short-term rental checklist, I'm going to put that in the show notes. But if you are ready to even take the next step and you would like to schedule a free consultation call with me, what my goal is from this consultation call is basically to see where you're at in the process, if I can help. And if I can, I want to tell you how I can help. So it's absolutely free. I just want to know where you're at in the process to see if I can contribute to the process at all. In conclusion, brand strategy is important. Don't skip it. We want to make sure the right guests are getting through your doors. We want to make sure you're getting them the experience that you want to give them and that they want to have. And we want to make sure that your interior design is cohesive with everything else in your brand, including your colors, your logo, your website, your email marketing, and your social media. So until next week, friends, here's to being the best in your brand and your market. You just completed another episode of the Brand & Market Podcast. If you found this helpful, please rate, review, and subscribe to help others find this show and so that you never miss an episode. Don't forget to take a look at the show notes for all the resources mentioned today. See you next Wednesday, and as always, I'm here cheering you on as you build your dream brand and business.